I've been asked to talk about standards and conformity assessment and accreditation, so not necessarily a small topic for this audience, but I'll do my best. I'm going to focus mostly on conformity assessment standards. As you can see there, I fulfill a role within ISO. I work in the ISO Committee on Conformity Assessment, ISO CASCO, and there I'm the convener of something called the Technical Interface Group, which has the role of technically interfacing with all of the ISO sector committees on different topics, and to assist them in standardising their approach to conformity assessment. Test methods, inspection methods, certification schemes, that type of thing is what we do a lot of interaction with specific ISO technical committees. So I'm going to cover three things, as I said. I'm going to finish off. The third thing was a last minute thing that they wanted me to cover too, which was just to talk about mutual recognition. So I'll have a go at that as well, and hopefully you'll be able to follow my presentation on that part. All right, first part though, let's talk about the conformity assessment standards. So look, there are many ways that you can present the quality infrastructure, technical infrastructure that you will find within an economy. And so here is just one further representation that I often like to use because I can build a story around it with regards to conformity assessment standards in particular. So generally speaking, we will always start with a group within society taking a policy interest, whether that be a government or businesses or NGOs or some civil group around, well, we really want things to work well. We want them to be safe, and so somebody better write some standards about that, and we better check to make sure those standards are being followed. Hence, you start with some policy impetus. I don't mean, though, only government policy, although often it does come from that sphere. People then want to rush and start writing down standards, but from my perspective, they miss out a critical point, and that is wait before you start codifying in writing and agreeing by consensus that this means safe or that level of performance needs to be achieved. We have to agree first on what is the unit of measurement. What is the base metrology that we've all agreed before we can start codifying these types of characteristics? So for me, the fundamental pillar for a lot of this infrastructure comes down to our metrologists and metrology to start with. Once we've agreed on measurements, okay, now we're in a position to codify what it is that we expect to happen with products, services, even with people and their competence. Standards then does a great job. We end up with a standard and then people want to check it. They want to inspect it. They want to test it. So this is where we come into the realm of conformity assessment. Then people want to make sure that, well, can I trust this test report? Can I really believe the inspection result? Is this certificate actually worth the paper it's written on? And hence we come to the next pillar around accreditation and peer assessment. And then you know and I know, we don't live in a perfect world. There are always people in every society, irrespective of where you are on the planet, that will want to bend the rules, cut the corners, cheat. And so in most modern economies, we will have some form of formal safety net around a market surveillance function. And what's this all going towards? Well, it's for us to achieve technical outcomes which we can trust. And that's for the benefit of everyone. So finishing off this little model, at the national level, I think we've already done this this morning, haven't we? So I'm going to note there that the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, at least in Canberra, hold the mandate to keep a policy watch on the quality technical infrastructure. But many of you will know that's not the only government department, whether it be at federal or state or territory level, that has an interest in what we do. Department of Health, Therapeutics Good Administration, Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, etc. So there are many government entities at different levels in our economy which have an interest in what we do. Metrology is actually part of government, and that's our National Measurement Institute, and we heard from Bruce this morning. Excellent. Standards, well, no surprise. Corrine and her colleagues in the room, Standards Australia. Although that we have to recognise that even within Standards Australia's model, they do, let me say, small a accredit other organisations to develop national standards. And we have to recognise that there are other standards bodies also. But for us, for the purpose of this model, think of the national standards body, Standards Australia. Now, previously, the governments on our behalf as citizens took a lot of interest in providing testing and inspection services. Over the decades, we've seen government, in some instances, choose to stop doing that and instead present it and rely on private sector service provision to do testing and inspection on our behalf. And that is a matter of political economic judgment. Over the years, things oscillate back and forth, but generally speaking, in Australia, we have both government and private sector conformity assessment bodies, whether they be laboratories, testing items, whether they be inspection bodies or certification bodies. And even within that group of conformity assessment bodies, some are very small, operate a couple of colleagues out the back of someone's garage, or in this day and age, not a garage at all required, just do it on the internet. Some are medium-sized and they might deal with testing for a metropolitan area, state level, national level. Or now we have multi-billion-dollar turnover multinational conformity assessment bodies as well that run international business in this space. Here in Australia, at least, we have two accreditation bodies for the purposes of this model, NATA and JASANS. NATA, traditionally laboratories, inspection bodies. JASANS, a little bit of inspection, a lot of certification, and a newfangled thing called validation verification. But don't get confused, I'm not talking about lab land validation verification, it's something different, trust me. And then in this country, we have a federal safety net in the form of the ACCC, and then we can rely on all of our officers of fair trading and so forth at state and territory level as well. So that's the picture that it looks like in this economy. As I think speakers have spoken to us this morning, it's then replicated at regional level and international level. So these bodies you see on the screen are Australia and New Zealand's representatives to a regional level, with all of their counterparts from other countries in Asia Pacific, and then ultimately to the international level as well. So at the, quickly, regional level, if you like, from a sort of an economic, tradey, government policy perspective, we have our club of 21 Asia-Pacific economies, APEC, and they have a subcommittee on standards and conformance. And we have, in one flavour at least, in the area of trade policy, the World Trade Organisation. And I'll come back to that at the end of this presentation. For our metrologist colleagues, we have two sides, scientific and legal metrology, at the Asia-Pacific level, which is similar to or replicated at the full international level. Our colleagues in standards belong to the Pacific Area Standards Congress, the club of all of their counterparts within the region, and then, for the purposes of this diagram, we'll pick on ISO and IEC as the international standards bodies. But there are others. I appreciate that. With regards to the the conformity assessment community, there's not really one well-recognised regional club of them. They tend to work and compete as businesses across borders, and that's fine. But they do coalesce at the international level, even though they're competing in many cases, in something called the Technical Infrastructure Council and also the International Independent Organisation for Assurance. It's a bit simpler for our accreditation folk. We have a PAC, of which Jennifer Evans is the chair, and for my sins, I'm the secretary. So that's the club of all of the Asia-Pacific accreditation bodies, NATA, JASANS, and all of their equivalents. And then at the international level within the accreditation community, we have ILAC and IAF. Once again, what's this all for? Well, the regional layer is to assist the Asia-Pacific community trade safely, trustworthy, and all of the citizens of Asia-Pacific are in a position to trust what they buy and what they use. And similarly, now we're at the global level, the same outcome. So listen, this is just a simplified diagram. I could go into a lot more detail, but I'm not. I just wanted to introduce that because it does try on one picture to give you a flavour of these quality technical infrastructures, but at the three layers. I'm going to use that to explain conformity assessment standards. So, which part of this is what we call conformity assessment? Well, it's those three pillars. The conformity assessment bodies, the accreditation peer assessment function, and then the market surveillance. Question, who writes the standards for all of that conformity assessment stuff? Well, it's done by ISO, one of the international standards bodies, ISO Casco. And as I think Jennifer explored in her presentation just previously, a lot of the ISO Casco stuff, though, didn't happen initially at the ISO level. In fact, it was a lot of bottom-up. And just like Jennifer showed us the minutes, 1947, of the minimum requirements for registration of a laboratory by the National Association of Testing Authorities, well, if you ever want to blame where the hell did these people get 17025, you don't have to go very far, because there is an Australian contribution which over the decades has blossomed into what we currently have as 17025. We also, as Australia, have had similar seeds which have grown and now form the international standards world for conformity assessment. So we do punch above our weight. So there's a specific committee within ISO, the Conformity Assessment Committee. They write standards for bodies, of which most of you will be quite familiar with. They write standards for the accreditation bodies themselves, and they write standards for how to do peer assessment, and they write a guide on how to do mutual recognition. So all in one place, there is the world's standards engine for things related to conformity assessment. And the principles that underlie these standards are set. They change, but not very often. And it's called something a functional approach, which we don't have time to go into, but it's like the boiled down basic steps of all conformity assessment, regardless of what you're doing. There is the World Trade Organization Principles and Agreements, and Devon, my colleague from Geneva, will speak about that later today, I believe. And there's something called the Common Elements, which basically is the codification of the same approach to tricky issues like impartiality, all right? Complaints, appeals, those type of things that often you will stumble across in an assessment or an evaluation. They come from, yes, we know they've been a problem and we've thrashed them over the decades, and the reason why you have to put up with what's now written is because they have been discussed internationally, and that's the international consensus. We also, as we know, have supplementary requirements that we have to follow. All right, so next one is going to be a very busy slide. I'm going to go fast. You can take this and have a look at it later, but here goes. All right, on one slide, I'm going to try and put all of these international standards for conformity assessment in the right space. Well, when it comes to our model, here are the pillars which you are familiar with, okay? When it comes to policy, here are the documents written by ISO IEC to assist regulators, policymakers, whether they be corporate, government, NGO, on the basic fundamentals for the internationally accepted system of conformity assessment. In metrology, I could have perhaps put the reference material standards in here to some extent as well, but I'm just going to pick on 17025, but the calibration side for now, okay? Standards, well, believe it or not, there are actually standards for how to write standards. And in fact, it's not, and it's even more detailed than that, because there's even standards on how to write conformity assessment standards. And so these are the two documents which set that up, and one of them's under review. If it's got a red box around it, it's on the move. And that's how Standards Australia's committees should write their standards in a way that we, as conformity assessment folk, after they've done their job, we can pick it up in the lab or at the auditor or at the certification desk and actually understand what you people wanted exactly. So that guide is for standards writers on how to make their standards precise, clear, so we, on the conformity assessment side, can understand what you wanted. All right, not surprisingly, given the topic here, the biggest boxes are around the conformity assessment standards. So here goes. I've got them grouped. Firstly, the methods or techniques of conformity assessment. And then the second group you will see is the actual types of claim of conformity we see in the marketplace. So go with me. Let's start simply. A product. So what do you normally apply as a conformity assessment tool to a product? Well, possibly you're going to test it. What if it's a product or a facility or an installation? Any guesses? You're probably going to inspect it. If it's a product, process or service, in product certification land, they call what they do evaluation, which can rely on a test report, inspection report, or a combination of both for them to then evaluate the product and certify it. So while I've got these conformity assessment methods in boxes, they're fuzzy lines, okay? And these things will flow depending on your particular conformity assessment scheme. They are often used in combination. Management systems. Well, I think most of you have come across those, and there is a very large international industry with those, with well over a couple of million companies around the world being certified to one or other management systems. And what do we do with that? Well, we generally do an audit. The international standard for auditing management systems is under revision, so that is also on the move and will no doubt flow in the couple years to come into our world as conformity assessment bodies as well. Person. What do you mean person? Well, I mean person. They're the object of conformity. Well, what are you measuring of a person? What, their height or their weight or? No, their competence. Okay, now I understand. So we have concepts of person certification against competency requirement criteria, and the methodology that the person certification people use are assessments, examinations, not rocket science, you probably knew all of that, but that's what their language is. And then this is the new area. Increasingly, we're seeing people wanting to make claims of conformity in the market, declarations of their performance in the market based on their count and aggregation of data. Think of greenhouse gas emissions. It's a real thing they're measuring, but there's a lot of data behind it. And in some cases, they may just be calculating based on tables of other people. So many tonnes of brown coal in the state of Victoria equals X number of tonnes of carbon. I put it in the calculator and I get my carbon footprint. Others will go to the expense of actually at the top of the stacks putting in their sophisticated stack emissions measurement technology and do it from base and not rely on calculation tables. But this is that funny field now of data and information. So the new tool there is something called validation verification. The most recent iteration of this is, particularly in Europe, everyone is very hot to trot on environmental, social and governance reporting. There's a new regulation. Companies over a certain turnover now must, alongside their financial annual statements, report their ESG statement. And it's going to get audited by an auditor. But the auditor is not going to give a pass-fail. They're going to give an opinion, whether or not the numbers, based on what they've reviewed, stack up with a reasonable or limited degree of assurance. So that is that space. It's not the classic old pass-fail that we know and love, perhaps those of you that come from my end of conformity assessment. It's the new end of conformity assessment where the actual outcome is a professional judgment, not dissimilar to maybe inspection, but it comes with a preordained limited or reasonable level of assurance. And then people that get this, they can make their own decisions. So these are the types of standards for the methods. Moving to the bottom box is, okay, good, I've got my test report. Well, if you're a first party, I'm the manufacturer, I can self-declare, can't I? There is a conformity assessment standard for self-declaration. What are the minimum things that the manufacturer must have in their back pocket in order to do a proper self-declaration? Or is it just the marketing department? No, there is actually a standard that tells they've got to have proper technical data behind them, etc., etc. Hold records, technical report. Second party, in ISO IEC conformity assessment land, we don't have a bespoke, specific document for that. And when it comes to third party, when it comes particularly around product management system or person, well, we give that a special term, which is certification. There's product process and service certification. And there's a series of documents there that set out the international arrangements for how you make product certification schemes. And on the far right-hand side, the minimum requirements for a product certification body, and that's what JASANS uses to accredit product certification bodies. When it comes to management systems, we have a special standard for management system certification bodies. Once again, that's what JASANS uses as a basis for accrediting management system certification bodies. And yes, there's one for people as well. So you see the red glow at that bottom end of the slide? All of the product certification stuff at the moment is under heavy review. This happens about once every 2 decades. So what comes out of this will probably be a step change around product certification in the future. We will see. We're probably about 2 years away from publishing. All right, so what I've endeavoured to do just there is the conformity assessment CAB, conformity assessment body stuff. Haven't quite finished. There are conformity assessment standards, like I mentioned, for the accreditation peer assessment function. These are the numbers. And believe it or not, even though ISO and IEC are non-governmental organisations, they're not some international regulator, no, they're just an NGO. They do, though, produce useful guidance for regulators on how to carry out their market surveillance exercise. So now we're at the full picture. That's all of ISO IEC, most of ISO IEC's conformity assessment standards on one slide orientated to the right place in the technical infrastructure. And I'm sorry, it's dense, but that's what they asked, so that's what I've given them. All right, the rest of the presentation is going to go very quickly. Accredited conformity assessment results. Wow. This goes back to that functional approach I was talking to. There's always a step of selection. That is, well, what is the object I'm conformity assessing? What are the requirements that that object of conformity have to meet? Do I understand and have I got a good grip on the measurements we're going to use for this? And is the equipment that I'm using in particular calibrated to give me a true, for metrologists, don't have a heart attack, true unit of measurement result? Allows us to then move on to number 2, assessment, which most of you will be very familiar with, and then ultimately we're going to end up with a result. You know and I know there are millions of these conformity assessment activities taking place right now all over the world. The purposes can be varied, and the results are often used in combination and for you to make a judgment whether this object meets the requirements. While we may not think about it in a testing lab or inspection situation, certainly in product certification, the way that the rules are set down to do all of that is known as a conformity assessment scheme. So, how can we trust these results? Well, one of the big tools that we have is accreditation. And why is accreditation useful for us? Because it does the 3 magic things which back in 1947 the NATA board wrote down for labs, apply equally to all conformity assessment bodies. Are they competent? Are their people competent? Are they impartial in undertaking their activity? Even if you're a lab inside a manufacturer, are you impartial in doing your testing? And can you bring us reproducible results if we gave you the same sample the following day? Is the quality systems in place? Are you consistent? So in this country, we have two august accreditation bodies. I like to refer to them maybe inappropriately for 2024 as the older sister and the younger sister. But nevertheless, we should be proud as Australians in particular because we were first in this space, actually. 1947 with NATA. You've heard Jennifer's explanation, wartime need and all of these things, that's fine. And in different ways, the rest of the world have followed. In the case of Jazan's younger sister, particularly out of the quality movement of the 1980s, 9001, there was a need for a similar type of organisation for certification. The measurands here are not consistent, bad metrology. NATA counts sites that it accredits, Jazan's counts organisations which have multiple sites. So this is why, don't get confused with the numbers, Jazan's is not quite as small as what it may look like against the numbers of NATA. All right, that's part two. Accredited conformity assessment results, how can we trust them? Well, one tool we've got in our arsenal, or in our quiver, is accreditation. All right, part three. How does this all work on the international stage? Now, Devon, my colleague from the WTO, will get into this in more detail later. So just quickly, in the forerunner to the World Trade Organization, there was something called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It was a long 30, 40-year negotiation process where all the world tried to sit down and set out international rules for trade. In particular, they were trying to reduce tariffs, which distorted the market, protected inefficient industries, and annoyed people to the point that they may well go to war. These bodies came from World War II. It was one of the economic solutions to try and stop that ever happening again. So the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade finally got approved and was agreed, and the World Trade Organization was formed in 1995. That's how long it took us as global society to get to a final agreement. One of the agreements is the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. And in the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, guess what? It talks about metrology, standards, conformity assessment, and accreditation. And so in the WTBT agreement, we as a signatory as Australia promise, commit, are obliged to ensure that our quality infrastructure is not used in a bad way to inappropriately stop or inhibit international trade. In fact, we're on the flip side. We should be using our skill sets to make sure that Australian products can get into other markets, and likewise, if they're safe and trustworthy, other products can come here. So from a trade angle, the WTO recognises everyone in the room. You're all part of the picture here. That was just a quick summary. I'm not going to go into detail with that. One of the concepts within the World Trade Organization agreement is that if we can have trust and that another country's testing, inspection or certification regime, maybe under accreditation or not, is deemed equivalent to what we can do at home, we can then have confidence in their system. And so when they send the container load of trade goods with the appropriate test reports, inspection reports, certifications, the theory is that we can accept that because they're already deemed as good as us. We've already judged they're equivalent, and so come on in. Likewise, we put our stuff on the boat and we take it over there, similar. We mutually recognise each other as being technically equivalent and trustworthy. It allows us to free trade with each other from a technical safety and trust perspective. This is the goal of the TBT agreement, and one of the major ways to achieve that goal is this diagram, not quite yet, mutual recognition of these conformity assessment results. Obviously, it's going to reduce multiple testing, hold-ups at the border. We can make sure that it's one standard, one test, accepted everywhere is the mantra. The costs of supply, the cost of import reduce. And need I say it, ISO IEC and conformity assessment standards, there is a guide for that. Right, just quickly, this is how it's meant to work. We have an organisation, say a manufacturer in one country, and they have an agreement to supply somebody in another country. Normal, commercial, contract, buy, sell. But the organisation N wants to make sure that where they're getting the stuff from and organisation A is doing it appropriately. So in the contract they say, well, we want your stuff to be tested or inspected or certified. Fine. Likewise, in the opposite flow, we want you to be equivalent and tested and certified and inspected. Great. How do we know we can trust each other? Well, if your side is accredited by your accreditation body, and our side is accredited by our accreditation body, and these two accreditation bodies have signed a voluntary mutual recognition arrangement, bingo, we've got the basis for mutual recognition of the conformity assessment results. We trust that accreditation body, we go there, we watch what they do, and they pass, then we can have confidence that everyone they accredit underneath is all right. And hence the conformity assessment result that those people deliver can be accepted. Where the particular magic, this is all on the voluntary side, where the particular magic comes with mutual recognition is when regulators or governments agree. And they say, listen, we want to have a fair trade agreement. We want to use the concept of mutual recognition, but they call it an agreement because it's government to government. And they designate, using the voluntary system, the accreditation bodies, and they reference the voluntary mutual recognition arrangement. So this mutual recognition, I hope this slide's tried to paint a little picture. At the moment it's two-dimensional, but think about it, it goes three-way trade, four-way trade, five-way, 164-way trade. We only need to focus on the accreditation bodies trusting each other, and we get the pyramids underneath each to mutually recognise, if you can understand what I mean. It's much more simpler than one manufacturer having to go to 164 different testing labs in 164 different countries and make their own judgment. This is the way international trade, from a technical perspective, operates, and that's the criticality of your accreditation system. Okay. We've got NATA, JASANS, you know that. They are members of the regional club of accreditation bodies, APAC. APAC is a member of the international bodies, one for certification, one for labs. And by the fact that the region is a member of the international club, it automatically grandfathers NATA and JAZANS into the international system. So it's no longer recognised just within our Asia Pacific colleagues, now it's global. So this is how the mutual recognition system works, feeding through the region's recognised internationally, so it flows back to the individual accreditation bodies and suddenly all of their cabs, bonza, are recognised everywhere in the world. Just by way of finishing slides, here is the numbers as of around early 2024. Around the world, under the IAF agreement, of which JAZANS is our signatory, there's roughly 11,500 certification bodies which are accredited by all of the signatories, other JAZANS and their partner and their equivalents. And so all of the certificates that they issue are recognised. In lab land, under the ILAC MRA, you can see the numbers there, and then you can see the regional percentage. So actually most, but then again, that's not surprising because APAC is the largest region for accreditation in the world. We've got over 50% of the accredited scopes. Remember, APAC starts at Russia, the Middle East, and comes right across Asia, including China and all the rest, across the Pacific, and takes in North America, all right? And some of the South American countries on the Pacific coast. So it's not surprising that we have this position. All right, that's it. Probably took too long.